Okay, great. Welcome again, everyone. To start off the meeting, I would like to welcome Güney Işıkara, who will be giving us updates on the elections in Turkey. He is a clinical assistant professor of liberal studies at NYU. He has published commentaries on politics in Turkey in various outlets such as Jacobin and Jadaliyya. Guney, thank you for joining us. I welcome you to take the floor.
Thank you, Sarah. I'll try to be brief and keep it confined to 15, if not then 20 minutes. Before I start commenting on the elections and giving an update, I must start by emphasizing, and I think it is very important, that no election in Turkey, at least since 2015, has met even the most conservative minimum standards of a democratic electoral process in any sense of the word. Think about the media embargo. The media has been almost totally monopolized by the government. And that also implies that, for example, no HDP representative can appear on any TV channel. And before any electoral round, dozens, if not hundreds of Kurdish and pro-Kurdish and socialist journalists are regularly arrested. And this was the case also this time, 2 rounds of arrests. And alternative media resources are regularly shut down and silenced. And on top of that, the judiciary and the police is actively used against the opposition. For example, before these elections, even MP candidates of the HDP got arrested, during the campaign process itself. And the voting day itself is a different story. Pretty much all the rules that you can imagine, which are determined by the High Electoral Council, are violated by the ruling fascist bloc on a regular basis in every part of the country. So no discussion of elections in Turkey should ever be made without questioning the very legitimacy of the process itself. This must be emphasized every time. We shouldn't normalize this. So that is the caveat I want to just put up there right at the beginning. And as you know, there were 2 elections at the same time, a parliamentary elections as well as a presidential election. And they have different implications. They have they represent different, not 2 different pictures, but we can derive different conclusions from those different elections. So I will relate to both. Let me start with the parliamentary one, which took place only on May 14th. So there was no second round here. There were some reports of electoral fraud here and there. The HDP, which entered the election as the Green Left Party, because there's a significant likelihood that the party will be banned at some point. So the HDP votes were stolen and registered for various parties, especially for the fascist MHP, the Nationalist Movement Party. I think we'll never know the exact extent of such fraud, but both the HDP and the CHP did not make a very big deal out of this, which implies that it did not have a huge direct impact on the parliamentary electoral results. But we know now that in the first round of the elections, at some 25 or 35,000 polls, the opposition was absent, which means actually there can be some significant electoral fraud there. And there's no way to find out what happened before the election when the voter lists were being published, because pretty much all institutions in the country are ruled by the government. So no one knows what happened there. That must be noted as well. But let's go to the results. We can talk about 3 main blocks: the People's Alliance, Cumhur İttifakı, which is the fascist bloc, the AKP, Erdogan's AKP, almost explicitly fascist MHP. And then in this round, they had 3 or 4, smaller minor parties involved. They got 320 out of 600 seats in the parliament. And in the last round, before these elections, they had 340. So they lost more or less 20 seats, which is a loss, but which definitely falls short of what people were expecting. what people were expecting, in fact, was that the so-called Table of Six, or the other big alliance, the National Alliance, Millet İttifakı, would get the majority of the seats in the parliament, but they only got 212 seats. And this Table of Six is, I mean, this is the main opposition, but its character, its political character and content, I mean, it is led by the Republican People's Party, which also had the presidential candidate Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu. But then the second big party in this coalition is İYİ Party, the Good Party, which is kind of a secular offshoot of the fascist MHP. So, I mean, not too different, actually, when it comes to the Kurdish question, for instance. And then they had Deva and Gelecek, which are recent breakups from Erdogan's AKP. So, I mean, one shouldn't be also very optimistic about the political meaning of this opposition. And there's a reason why I want to emphasize it at this point. I'll get back to it. And the third alliance was the so-called Labor and Freedom Alliance, led by the HDP. And then it also contained certain socialist parties. They got only 65 out of 600 seats. The target was 100. So there's a clear failure here too, which is nowadays subject to some process of criticism and self-criticism within the party as well, which manifests itself in the media to some extent. I'll talk about that later on. Now, so Erdogan's extended alliance in this electoral round, it interestingly includes Hüdapar, usually referred to as like the Kurdish Hezbollah in Turkey. I don't like this analogy because, I mean, as opposed to the Lebanese Hezbollah, Hüdapar is not part of the national resistance. Quite on the contrary, it has been kind of established and supported by the Turkish regime, by the Turkish state, in opposition to the Kurdish freedom movement. So there's a significant difference there. But it is a very, religiously oriented Kurdish party, and that was also part of Erdogan's extended alliance. It's interesting because the same alliance includes like at least two far right-wing nationalist parties and some small Islamist parties here and there, which got surprisingly high votes, which can be partially explained by the fact that Erdogan's AKP, Justice and Development Party, fell down to some 35%. Which is a historical low since the very first day it was established since 2002. Its vote share has always been above that, actually. So there's some decrease in the vote share of the AKP, but that doesn't change the fact that the outcome is this is the most conservative, this is the most religious and nationalist parliament ever elected in the history of the republic. So not an easy period is in front of the Kurdish movement and the socialists, the pro-Kurdish bloc in Turkey. So I think that it is a mistake to read politics in Turkey from the lens of like a one-man regime. Erdogan determines everything. And the very fact that he had to consistently extend his alliance. Now, instead of two parties, they have 5-6 parties, and they contradict themselves on a regular basis. But this is also showing that Erdogan, if you take him like as an individual, or his Justice and Development Party, is standing on top of an alliance. They are not governing alone. So that is important to keep in mind, because one of the mistakes of the opposition, both the mainstream opposition and I believe the Labor and Freedom Alliance led by the HDP, was to reduce almost the entire content of the election to getting rid of Erdogan. They constantly and only talked about one-man regime and getting rid of it. And I don't think that is the best way to frame politics in Turkey. The Nation Alliance, on the other hand, led by Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu's CHP, it also failed significantly because pretty much everyone, including themselves, were very confident about gaining majority in parliament. And they did not. And the main source of their confidence was the very high inflation in the country, and then the mismanagement of the earthquake process, particularly, but of state resources in general. So there was kind of a mechanic expectation there. Things are not well, so people are going to get rid of this alliance, well, it did not happen. So we have to be more thorough in our thinking in identifying the sources of power of the government. Yeah, I mentioned that the electoral campaigns mostly focused on getting rid of Erdogan, you know, it is a process of restoration. This is not the first time that an alliance or a commitment almost exclusively defined by anti-Erdoganism is defeated. Like, it has been consistently like this the past 5-6 years. A very weak positive imaginary was offered by the Nation Alliance, and it was not a popular one. I mean, the economic policies, basically the economic promise was back to the normal of the IMF and the international finance capital, because they promised bringing back Ali Babacan, who served under Erdogan more than 10 years as the finance minister, and who only stopped being a member of the AKP in 2019. And they were promising to bring him back as like the person who is going to save the economy. He is very beloved. He's the beloved one of the IMF, which means budgetary discipline and cutting public expenditures, boosting international competitiveness, which is all, you know, counter labor politics. And like an ordinary person in Turkey can understand this, because they experienced it round after round in 1994, in 1999, in 2000. All these structural adjustment reforms and so on and so forth. People know what they mean for the working classes. So that was not very popular, apparently. And all in all, like the main opposition ignored or silently approved the social, the ecological, and the economic grievances, you know, of 4 decades of full-speed commodification and marketization. They were totally silent about the Kurdish question, other than just saying, you know, we will solve it in the parliament, which is another way of saying we're not going to sit down with the terrorists and talk. You know, like, the solution will be in the parliament means we're not going to talk to Öcalan, we're not going to talk to PKK, because they're terrorists. So whoever wants to solve the problem has to come to the parliament. That was their line of critique during the peace negotiations from 2011-2015. They were saying it's intransparent and the state is talking to the terrorists. What has to instead happen is that, you know, people have to come to the parliament and the solution is there, of course, which is a way of, you know, not recognizing the power which you're in war with. I mean, the most important for our perspective is, of course, the Labor and Freedom Alliance, which was led by the HDP, which had significant issues already before the election, because there was some disagreement over the lists with the newly emerging Workers' Party of Turkey. But their campaign, unfortunately, was almost exclusively focused on getting rid of Erdogan and the process of democratic restoration. And that is where the illusion comes into the picture for me, because, I mean, things were not, I mean, maybe here and there better, but not way better before Erdogan too. So there's a continuity. And in the West, usually I see this like kind of reading of the Erdogan period as a big rupture in the history of the Turkish Republic. I believe rather that the lines of continuity, the avenues of continuity are much starker, in my opinion, than where one can see a rupture. And more importantly, the HDP, or the Labor and Freedom Alliance, was shadowed by its unconditional support for Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu in the presidential election, because the presidential election was under the spotlight for everyone. That was the main, you know, the main focus of attention. And let me talk about that some too. As you probably know, there was no decision made in the first round, because neither Erdogan nor Kılıçdaroğlu got more than 50% of the votes, although Erdogan was almost there, some 49.47%, I guess, which was a big disappointment, like, which caused a big wave of demoralization for the opposition, because all the mainstream polls, I mean, like 11 out of 12 polls were showing that, you know, it was like Clinton and Trump. It was showing that Kılıçdaroğlu would clearly win. And everybody was confident. People even started to celebrate before the elections, so we're getting rid of him. And it didn't happen. And then there were 2 additional weeks before the second round of the elections. And there was a third candidate, Sinan Oğan, who was another offshoot of the MHP and then the E Party. I mean, another basically line of continuity with the right extreme narrative. and politics in Turkey, he got, interestingly, 5% of the votes. So all of a sudden, Kılıçdaroğlu shifted gears to a heavily anti-refugee tone, focusing almost only on the promise of sending the Syrian and Afghan refugees back to their country with a very racist tone. I mean, interestingly, it was Erdogan who was saying, not that I approve, I mean, his politics, but he was saying, are we really a state who cannot, host people who are fleeing their countries? Like, it was Erdogan who was defending this line, and the seemingly democratic guy was like, we're going to send them all back to their countries within 1 year. No one is going to stay in Turkey. And they signed a commitment with the leader of another small fascist party, which the commitment highlighted fight against terrorism and included a special clause on the continuance of appointing centrally determined appointees or trustees in the place of democratically elected municipal Kurdish governors. So Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu signed this document to get the support of the far right voters, which also shows that, like, his initial commitment to democratizing the country, which was of course on the surface, was nothing serious, right? Because, like, all of a sudden you switch to such a campaign. And it didn't work, of course. So this was the point where the commitment of the Labor and Freedom Alliance, the HDP, most importantly, to only getting rid of Erdogan as the absolute and almost exclusive aim, turned out to, in my opinion, significantly undermine its own position. They criticized this process explicitly, but not in a very stark tone. They said, we will keep supporting Mr. Kılıçdaroğlu because we're here to democratize our country. But, ironically, the candidate you're supporting, what he was promising was nothing that had to do with democratization. So let me say here, I mean, the birth and the rise of the HDP, which also was a process parallel to or preceded by the foundation of the HDK, People's Democratic Congress, which is the real grassroots organization, not focused on the parliament and elections, but building grassroots politics also in the west of the country, to the extent that the Kurdish movement was able to organize in Kurdistan. So HDP is an offshoot of that, and is still within HDK, People's Democratic Congress. That was a real project, and the historical claim was to open a third way of politics in Turkey, which is not doomed to either nationalist, either status quo faction, right? One led by the founder of the republic, the CHP, the other one by the current ruling bloc, Erdogan and his allies. Both of these camps are diehard defenders of the foundations of this, deeply oppressive, exploitative, Sunni Turkish and male-dominated regime of the republic. I mean, they have never confronted it; they have never problematized it. So the HDP, and the HDK was the very project, was the name of the project to open a third way, which was welcomed by masses in the period 2013 to 15. And then it was, of course, totally criminalized. So that is why it is interesting to me. And that is why nowadays, I mean, now following the electoral process, many people are actually articulating such critique, also from within the party, by the way, that the unconditional support given to the bloc led by the CHP, both in this election and in 2019 in the municipal elections, was kind of, working towards the party itself. So a process of self-criticism has started, and let's talk some about the prospects before I finish. I mean, there's now in the country a super nationalist climate that is mainly kept alive and dynamic through just criminalizing the Kurdish movement. There's a very anti-Kurdish sentiment at the moment. When Erdogan had two speeches at the night of his electoral victory, one in Istanbul, the other one in Ankara at the presidential palace. And as he was talking, the big mass gathered in the, in front of the palace were yelling, death to Demirtas, Selahattin Demirtas, execution for him, they were calling, and he was stopping and letting them chant that. And, interestingly, pretty much all the electoral campaign of Erdogan and his bloc was just, stamping Kurds as terrorists and trying to reveal the links between the main opposition and these terrorists, and a very stark anti-LGBTQ narrative. I mean, they were constantly saying, the Nation Alliance is LGBTQ. I mean, they literally said this, whatever that means. They said, if you elect them, man will marry man, humans will marry animals and stuff like that. And but they used a very hateful narrative throughout the entire process, which is kind of disappointing because the HDP and their alliance was also quite silent on this matter, which has been criticized and also is being criticized nowadays as well. Another point was, now we learned actually yesterday from a long interview with Selahattin Demirtas, the imprisoned former co-chair of the HDP, that he proposed himself at the beginning of the year, months before, he proposed himself as a possible presidential candidate of the HDP, and he tried to convince the party administration that it is actually a better option to nominate its own candidate, basically, run with its own campaign so that it can politicize its own base and other people, which was rejected by the party administration. It was, I think, a big mistake. And I'm not saying this right now. I mean, this has been part of many people's critique, including me, since 2-3 months. But again, here we must say, and Demirtas also is making this emphasis in his interview, tens of thousands of party members of the HDP are imprisoned. So every sentence spoken about the HDP and its failure must be understood in the context of this caveat. I mean, it is breaking, or significantly hurting the backbone of the party. This is not only the commanding heights, the co-chairs of the party, but long-time respected organized forces, the middle rank members and grassroots members, which can politicize the masses. People from Kurdistan will tell you that the state is very strategic in choosing whom they arrest. It's never random. So there's always a logic to it. So the HDP is now in a process of self-criticism. The party is making statements about this every day. I think, with seeing this, its vote share was some 8.5%. I think it's, again, a historical low for itself. But the Kurdish movement, in this case, also its allies, because HDP is not the only Kurdish movement, not only the Kurdish movement, but its allies as well, has always been able to bounce back from such temporal declines in a much better condition. And I hope they will be able to do this in this round as well, and recognizing the failure explicitly and going back to the grassroots organizations, going back to the people. That's what they say, what they're doing right now, going back to the people and questioning every single step in this process, be it the nomination of the candidates of the party, be it, from the very top to the very bottom, everything is being questioned. And I think this is something very positive. I'm pretty confident that a positive outcome will come from that. The Labor and Freedom Alliance, I think it's important to have the alliance and even extend that alliance because, as I mentioned, the parliament, which is only a part of the picture, but it can give you an idea about what is expecting us. It is by far the most conservative and religious parliament of the history of the Republic. And Erdogan and his allies are adopting a very inimical, a very stark tone against the Kurds. I think the three main targets of the upcoming process from the viewpoint of the government, the regime, will be women, LGBTQ, and the Kurdish movement. They'll try to consolidate their mass, they'll try to continue their reign on the ideological basis by attacking these three political subjectivities. Now, possible cracks might emerge both within the main opposition nation alliance because they're not happy about this failure, so there might be cracks there, and also in the People's Alliance, Erdogan's alliance, because of many things. I mean, it's getting harder and harder to govern the country because of the multifaceted deepening crisis. I mean, it's right there. No one is rejecting it. But the government has been pretty successful in moderating or governing those crises so far. But that doesn't change the fact that there is some sort of increasing difficulty, which is the main reason why the government is expanding its alliance continuously. And also, again, I'm not in favor of reducing anything to Erdogan's the individual of Erdogan, but he seems to be pretty sick at this point and exhausted. And this is manifested in various speeches, the way he walks, the way he talks. There are all kinds of rumors out there, which I don't find interesting, but this increases the likelihood of conflicts within the alliance, especially between possible successors, because it is a very well-known fact that there are many factions within this alliance, which, pretty much dislike each other. So there's also that. But what is awaiting for us is a full-fledged nationalist, fascist, and conservative attack, mainly attacking women's rights and the LGBTQ, and of course, the Kurdish movement. And in terms of foreign policy, as regards Rojava, I don't expect a significant change. Turkey has been playing this role of the independent power. I mean, that's the narrative they're selling domestically, the independent power between the West and the East, whereas I disagree with people who say, because Turkey is flirting with Russia, it's going to get farther and farther from the NATO alliance. I think it's very difficult. I mean, the EU still absorbs 40% of Turkey's exports. 8 of the 10 top importers of Turkish exports, they are from the so-called Western Bloc, the NATO countries. I mean, even if you were willing to do so, it's not a matter of a couple of months or years to basically restructure these economic, relations, let alone the military dependence of Turkey's on NATO. And for a very long time now, Turkey has been pushing for a model to establish itself as the new China of Europe, with like very cheap and very heavily exploited labor. So I don't think that it's just going to turn its back to the West, and it's going to probably continue playing the role of the independent mediator between the two, flirt with both of them, and mainly attack the Kurds in the region. So I think, that's longer than I expected, sorry. I can stop there.
Great, thank you so much for that. Definitely a long and complicated issue, and just based on these few things that were discussed, we can see how the elections and the results of the elections are based on a lot of underlying issues that exist in the country. So thank you so much for those updates. For those who are just joining, this is recorded, so if you missed anything, you'll be able to go back and hear everything. What we'll be doing for the rest of the meeting, we're going to go through some updates, discuss upcoming events, and then we'll have an open floor and the phone bank. So right now, if Debbie or Anya would like to discuss the memorial event for Meredith.
Actually, I would like to mention one additional thing in terms of updates on the region before we move on to other items. But before I do that, so that we don't keep Guney for too long, anyone has any question? I think it was very kind of detailed update, but let's see if people have any questions, sort of particularly on Turkey, what repercussions this Erdogan's victory has within Turkey.
Yes, Jonathan, go ahead.
Thank you so much, and Guney, for such an informative talk. I really appreciate it. One thing that I'm wondering about is with the safe zone that they keep calling it, that Turkey is trying to, into Syria, the 30 kilometers or so between the two. What I wonder is now with Erdogan winning, and any future interventions in Turkey. Of course, we can't know the future, but I'm curious with the implications, especially all the xenophobic rhetoric, right, against the Syrian refugees in Turkey. I just wonder, is there, do you think they'll follow through with what they've been saying about deporting the refugees to this safe zone to dilute the demographics, of the Kurdish people, and kind of this is gonna undermine the Syrian refugees and the Kurdish people and serve the nationalist neoliberal priorities. But I just wonder, because you were saying that at least in the short term, you weren't foreseeing kind of major changes, but maybe a little more long term, like the 5-year term at least. And do you have some thoughts on any of this?
Yeah, I mean, it would be speculation, but I think what you say is perfectly possible. It's just like now a matter of that. I mean, first and foremost, any safe zone or anything at this point, I think it has to be revised, especially after now Assad is back to the table, right?
Right.
So they can't just say now we're invading. I think that is more difficult at this point. It's perfectly possible that they can negotiate things, and I think they are after it because Turkish high officials have been in a heavy traffic with Russia recently, and everything can be at the table. And in case they push for that, despite the fact that Erdogan and his clique didn't use this narrative of getting rid of the refugees, I mean, they never actually used that sort of a narrative. They say we have plans for their safe return to their home country. Whereas, I mean, the refugees have also another meaning for Erdogan because, I mean, he's using them as a token against the EU to make the EU, I mean, at least pay them, or, I mean, he threatens the EU regularly with the threat of opening up the borders. So, but now that, there's a large number, there's a big mass of refugees, they can perfectly do that. But mainly it will be the outcome of what they negotiate with Assad, with Russia, what they can get a permission from the United States. I mean, they have never done anything without getting permission from these powers, despite all the narrative of selling themselves as the neo-Ottoman rising power of the Middle East. I mean, they have done nothing independently of either Russia or the United States, or both in some cases. So, yeah, I mean, I don't think, by the way, they will certainly try to, drown Rojava. I mean, that is on the table, but whether or not they can push for that in the international political conjuncture, if they can get the right permissions. And what's going to happen domestically is also important. I mean, the PKK has been they haven't been actively attacking any Turkish forces unless they are attacked by the Turkish forces. That has been the case for some time now. And I have seen commentaries from Kurds now fed up with what is going on, like also asking the PKK to, stop that stance, which I don't know. I mean, I always have the feeling that for them, the priority is keeping Rojava safe at this point. But anything I would say more than this would be pure speculation. So, but if they do push for the safe zone, they can perfectly do what you said. I mean, they can perfectly relocate part of the refugees to that zone, under the banner of helping people return to their home country.
Well, let's hope not. But thank you so much. Very insightful. I really appreciate all your comments.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments, updates?
Yeah, if no other questions for Guney, I guess we can let you go, Guney. Thank you so much for
Thank you so much.
giving this wonderful.
Thank you again.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
But I wanted to mention the F-16 sale right now instead of leaving it till the end. I mean, the phone bank will be in the end, but I imagine some people will have to leave earlier. I just wanted, for everyone to discuss that piece of news. Biden called Erdogan to congratulate him on the re-election and mentioned the two issues of contention for between US and Turkey. One is the sale of F-16s, F-16 fighter jets and F-16 updates for the existing fleet that Turkey has, and NATO's accession, Sweden's accession into NATO that Turkey has been blocking so far as a NATO member. And interestingly, Biden sort of linked the two issues together and in reporting on that specific phone call that took place on Monday. So it seems, what the US is doing is trying to trade off this sale in return for Turkey's stopping to block the accession of Sweden to NATO. And that's, of course, quite worrisome for us. It's quite a big sale, $20 billion worth of new F-16 fighter jets and other upgrades, which has been, it has been widely documented that Turkey has been using those fighter jets to attack Kurds in Syria and Iraq, and other peoples in that region. And there has been some strong opposition within Congress. In particular, Bob Menendez, who is the chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, sort of maintained his opposition. And even after this call between Biden and Erdogan, reiterated that he would oppose it. But we also have had some signs that, given that it's a trade-off that's so important for NATO and for the United States, Sweden's ability to finally join NATO, there is a chance that Congress may step back on its opposition to the sale. But Senator Van Hollen, who is also one of the staunch opponents of Turkey within Senate, he also hinted a while ago, we discussed at one of our recent meetings, that this deal could go through as part of this trade-off. And also Representative Michael McCall, who is chair of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, also recently said that he would be open to approving this $20 billion sale based on the assurance that Turkey will allow Sweden to join NATO. So that's to say, that's why we have this phone bank in the end of this meeting to prevent this horrific deal to go through. I think we have Flint here. I don't know if you want to add anything. Sorry, I don't mean to put you on spot, but you're always best informed on these issues. Flint, I think you're unmuted, but we cannot hear you.
That work?
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, I think you all just about covered it. I don't think we're expecting much change. Diplomatically, Russia and the US had seemed to contain Turkey for now. The structural factors like the earthquake impact and the Turkey's terrible economy are still in play. Turkey's economy is not going to improve in the intermediate term unless we see some change out of Erdogan's financial policy, which we may or may not. Maybe now that the Turkish elections decided, the US may be willing to put its cards on the table and say what it actually wants to accomplish in Syria, but I suppose we will see what happens. But right now, Erdogan is an unpredictable but known quantity. Probably we will not see a pivot towards peace. However, Erdogan may, because of what many people speculate is his ill health, may instead try to groom a successor over the next couple of years, and be less interested in wagging the dog and waging war simply to help boost up his nationalist credentials with the national space. That said, the national space is still quite strong. So I don't think any positions about Russia or the US change in regards to their posture on Turkey. And yeah, I don't think Bob Menendez is going to let up on the F-16, though I think he's currently facing some own corruption issues on his own. But likely, even if Menendez was ousted, other people who would step into the Foreign Relations Committee chair would also not be in favor of Turkey getting those F-16s, particularly since there has been no political change.
Thanks so much. Anyone else has anything to add, comments or questions before we move on? Okay, cool. Sarah, take it away. And I'll stop recording since we're done with the updates.